What up, everybody? It is SCP-CRNP, aka Lack of Lepers, and welcome to Friday night's Weekend Collapsible, the very last one that we will do. So sad, but I appreciate you being here, and thank you for joining. I see my one and only there. You've been so faithful. It's just been a great time, you and me, just doing these streams. We'll do one more stream. This is not the last one that I'll do. Technically, the last one that I'll do will be on Sunday evening. That is this Sunday, the 28th. We will have a stream that will seep into Monday. So we'll be around for the midnight strike on the 28th. And myself and Harmony will be doing that. We'll be kind of seeing out the 7K, which I think we all know how it's going to end. But, you know, during these 7000 contest sort of crit sessions and reviews, we really didn't share our thoughts on what is likely to be the winner, which is the loser. So what we're going to do is share the thoughts that night on the 28th. We'll also give our top 10 individually that we read of the contest and just kind of, you know, shoot the shit for a few hours while the clock ticks down, and we'll be around to celebrate, I guess, sort of like the new year in the SCP Wiki containment fiction sort of space. But I do want to thank you once again for showing up tonight. We're starting a little early, and that's just because I can. I know there's only typically one person who watches this live. Thank you again. And so most people get this ex post facto, which is fine, which makes the punctual sort of time restrictions a little loosened in some ways. So I thought I'd go ahead and get this started. So appreciate you accommodating that. So tonight we're going to finish up the 7K entries. I had a couple questions my way, so I guess I'll answer them here. We will not be doing any other streams, so no Tuesday night. This is the last of the weekend streams that happen on Friday. All good things must come to an end. I'm really proud of what we did. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to miss doing this, honestly. I'm going to miss being at the bleeding edge of what's coming out on the SCP Wiki. I've had a really great time doing this. But, hey, all good things must come to an end. And, I hope somebody can pick this up. Maybe not exactly how it's done here. I know I get a little pedantic and, little microscopic and tunnel visioned, if you will. But, I certainly would appreciate somebody doing something like this. I would find it very beneficial on my end of things. After I'm done with doing this, I certainly would like somebody to sort of pick up the mantle, so to speak, so that I can keep up with what's coming out of the wiki, because I'm not going to have time to read it like I do now. But anyway, I hope otherwise this has been a very educational thing. I'm very proud of what we did. I think we're ending it at a good time. I don't regret doing this while I could. I had a great time doing it. I got to pretend for a time that this was like my main gig, so that was a lot of fun. So I appreciate everybody who's tuned in at any point and certainly participated in the show. But I hope you've learned something from the show. I hope you've learned something about crit, about reading, about writing, and maybe incorporating that into your own writing at a future date. And I think most importantly, I think, something I learned with this stream is that there really is a spirit of crit that is alive. I don't know if I want to say that it's alive and well at the SCP Wiki, but it is alive. And so that was really refreshing to see as I read other people's comments. I will say that I think it really only showed up during the 7K. I think besides that, when there's not that sort of dramatic event going on, the critical capacity of the wiki is somewhat blunted, somewhat muted, and doesn't do a great job. But if people could sustain what they're doing here in the 7Con comment sections, I think the wiki would be just, you're talking multiple tiers, multiple orders of magnitude better when it comes to the quality. People are holding people's feet to the fire, not letting them get away with bad writing, stuff like that. Anyways, I certainly think that, once again, I did see some people who I think did an excellent job on the whole. In fact, as I sort of become less, one of the main statements of this whole cast, this whole series, is that, a small team of people can keep up with the content that's coming out of the SCP Wiki. And that was something that, obviously it's difficult to do, but it can be done. And if you have the resources that something like the SCP Wiki has, same reason why you have a lot of articles coming in, it's just a very populated place. You can really probably keep up with crit on the site and it not really be that difficult. If I had a team of 10 people, 5 people, we could probably get through these pretty easily in a given week. And so just at the outset of the stream, I would like to kind of just say my dream, when it would come to being, looking at the SCP Wiki and what to see, I would love to see a crit team finally get off the ground at the SCP Wiki, a staff thing. And specifically, I think that team should consist of Lord. Lord should be leading that team. Lord is the best critic on the SCP Wiki. That position is threatened now that Kalinin is kind of back, I guess, a little bit. But it turns out, it seems as though Kalinin's style of crit is against the rules these days. So maybe not. Maybe Lord is safe in that position that I would put them in. But make a crit team, have Lord be the captain, get Dr. Trentavon, get Radioactive Rads, get Dr. Scaramucci, get Modulum, get SD lock, get ARD. Do not put ARD in charge of the team. ARD should not be anywhere near a leadership position, but let ARD be part of the team. Sword Lover 87 and totally not NB. I think maybe a few others. You've got yourself a dream team of crit with those people. So, bypass all the get voted into staff. Just cut that shit out. Nobody cares about that. Get the stick from out your ass. It's not a big deal. Just make Lord in charge of the team and then go. That's it. Get these people on. They're really, really good at what they do. I really particularly appreciated their comments when I came across them. And so that's really what we're going to kind of do tonight. This is sort of a long-winded introduction, I know. But I kind of am prefacing the whole night by these things that I'm saying. And what we're going to do, typically a show, we would get really, really into the nitty-gritty of things. We'd really latch in and get very, very microscopic, go through the whole thing, really honed in and zeroed in to a high degree of detail. It's not that we're not going to do that tonight. It's just that I've made a conscious effort tonight to be a little more casual, a little more, touch and go, kind of like Harmony style a little bit more tonight. Because what I want to do tonight is sort of spiritually pass the torch on to other people. And so what we're going to mainly do tonight, I'll do things like I usually do, but I'm going to take it easy a little bit on myself, okay? Because I'm leaving. I'm out of here, right? So, this is my victory lap, my farewell lap. I'm going to have a good time. So I'll do what I usually do, but we're going to try to highlight other people's comments a little more this stream than we usually do. Just because I definitely want you to be paying attention to these particular people who are really, really good at crit on the site. So with that in mind, let's get into it. We have been yapping quite enough, so here we are. We'll pull this up. We're back here. I kind of want to see, can I make this a little, I certainly don't want to do that. I'm trying to figure out if I can make this a little more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, so last time we ended, let's see. I'm really going to miss doing this, by the way. Really will miss this. I have a great time with this. We ended at Pool Boy last time, which I thought was a pretty good article. So tonight, we will start here with Jack and Joker by Riggin, and we'll end it up all the way at the top. We'll finish with Real Surreal Sirs, Lost and Unfound, which was the last article posted to the contest. Harmony did take a good chunk of these that we'll cover tonight, probably 10 of them or so. Harmony's not able to be with us tonight. We, as I said, are going to be doing a stream on Sunday that's going to be several hours and quite late into the evening. So Harmony is just resting up for that. It'd be understandably a little too much perhaps to try to do both of those in one weekend. So Harmony did some reviews and she sent us in a video that we'll do. We've done that before. We'll watch that video when we get to that. But so we'll get through this. Harmony will do hers, and then Fern was kind enough to take some articles and share thoughts about that too. So we'll do that for a few of these, and I'll finish out the rest. So yeah, so here we go. We'll start with Jack and Joker. So let's load this one up. This is by Riggin, who I know has been around in the site for quite a long time. This is at a rating of 0 as we currently look at it, and this was, I think, +2 or so when I looked at it earlier this week, so this is not doing particularly well in the popularity department. And I got to say, I think that's a pretty fair assessment of the article. I think the rating actually is a pretty good indicator of the quality of this particular article. And so we'll kind of look at it. It's not terribly long, just a quick introduction section. I actually quite like this visual component here. It has a good job of mixing some colors that aren't too garish, and I actually appreciate the yellow on the red just because this is supposed to catch your eye. So I like it. It's not the prettiest thing that I've seen aesthetically, but I think it does its job very well. And then we have a pretty long, basically action log here, some sort of transcript that happens here. Immediately we can see that the formatting here is seemingly incorrect. I'm not too sure what the author was doing. This is a pretty obvious thing to miss. Obviously, the typical, more traditional way to do this is to bold the people who are speaking here, and we see that that is not done. And it seems as it is intentionally not done. I really have a hard time imagining that the author overlooked this and that perhaps someone hasn't drawn, attention to it. So I have to conclude that this was intentional, and it just, say what you want to about it as a sort of, bold, I guess, decision, but I just don't think it works. I mean, if you're going to make a bold decision, I mean, essentially, not doing the format correctly. I mean, if you're going to go big. This is not going big. And once again, for all the benefit of the doubt I'm extending to the author here, I certainly still have to wonder in the back of my mind if this was an accident, because that's just how it comes off, even if it isn't an accident. So I think that kind of turned people off. I can look past that, and I don't think it's a huge deal, but thanks. It certainly is something to notice. Thank you so much. What do you think of this batch tonight? They look interesting. Thanks. I appreciate that. That's nice. My wife is being so kind. I appreciate that. She knows this is my last stream, so she's being nice. Made me some cookies. I'll eat these when Harmony does her thing. Maybe sooner than later now that I got these. So anyways, this is just kind of a questionable thing just to get into right away. We also have some image work that's a little questionable. Just we're still kind of looking at the article with our eyes, not quite with our brains yet. But the image here is just a little off-putting. I mean, the colorization is not great. Like I said, this color palette works well here, but does not work in this image very much. It's a pretty uninteresting thing to have an image of, and just looks, I don't know, like sort of like an incomplete Tom Servo, like a Tom Servo who wasn't put together well. So I'm not sure if this actually does anything. It's not really interesting. It looks like some sort of mundane piece of technological engineering. And then this second image work down here is just bad. I mean, this is very, very clearly just the flame on a candle wick. And it's trying to pass it off, unless I'm mistaken, it's trying to pass it off as something totally different, like something, some extraversal mirror perspective on SCP-7 chariot invasion progress, context pending. I mean, if there's supposed to be some sort of like meta or pataphysical thing going on here, which the article does sort of flirt with thematically, sure. It doesn't really work. I mean, once again, it's kind of like this formatting decision here. It just seems kind of shoddy, kind of low budget, kind of not really done with a lot of skill. And so I think this is a really, really poor image decision here. So just once again, visually, I think a lot of people are already off on the wrong foot with this article. We also have this insignia up here that centers around the MFT that's specific to this article, and it just doesn't seem to really be well placed. I don't know why that's there. Once again, if you're gonna do something like this, you probably need to go big and just slightly referencing the MFT that's in the article. I'm not sure if that's really a great move that's worth the risk that you're taking. But let's get into the actual article here. So in the Conprox, really the big thing that we get from this Conprox is that the windup of this article is just huge. It's very dramatic, it's very involved, and it's asking a lot of us. It has some technobabble in here, particularly with respect to the designations that it gives, this SCP-throne, this SCP-chariot, yada, yada, yada. So it comes off as a little technobabble because obviously we don't know what this is quite yet. The naming conventions, I think, are a little interesting, but they really fail to capture intrigue, I think. So really, all in all, pretty meek. There's not a whole lot of information that we're given here. We get down to the description, and even the first line, we're sort of, our hands are sort of held through a maze of, one second. Oh yeah, I kind of figured that because they look a little... Okay, we'll check it out. Thanks. We get to the first sentence of the description, and we're already sort of met with this idea that we're basically having our hands held through this article and its world building. So there's this maze of designations that all refer to one another. So let me just read this. I mean, if this is going to be your opening description, it's not much of a hook. And once again, it's a standalone sentence. If you're going to make the first sentence of a description a standalone sentence, you really got to hit that hard. This doesn't do that, so let me read that. SCP-7000 Throne is an extra-dimensional space created through Ritual 7000 Primus, quote-unquote, heroic ascent performed by multi-universal collaboration of Foundation analogs in the wake of the discovery of SCP-7000 Chariot. And it really honestly has a grammatical error. It should be performed by a multi-universal collaboration of Foundation analogs. Doesn't have that. So this is just a real flop right out of the gate. It's too convoluted. It's too cumbersome to really get through. It's hard to chew. It's difficult to really get anything out of. If this were something that I ate, I would chew it for a little bit and then maybe spit it out. It's kind of like over tough meat. So there's a really high threshold for interest already. We have to already sort of invest quite a lot just to kind of get this article, primed and kicking in the first place. So I think, honestly, we're already being asked too much by the conprox and this first sentence of the description. I think the author's already lost most people, and myself included. It's just too much to ask with not enough of a hook, not enough interest going on here. You really got to find an insertion point for the readers. I don't think that this was done very well for this article. We could have at least gotten, for example, a few word descriptions of what these official designations are. So let's say back in the conprox where we talk about chariot or throne, that might be a nice moment to just go ahead and put a footnote there, just so that we get a little bit of an introduction to these things with a more official introduction later. That maybe can clear up or help us along a little bit of some of this sort of highly technical naming nomenclature. I think that would probably have done this article a little bit of justice, because the conventions here get very, very cluttered very quickly and very unenjoyably. For example, we get to kind of dramatic moments of sort of the prose tripping over itself, trying to explain things. Here's a good example. The second sentence of the description. SCP-7000 Throne is populated by artificial sapient life forms, and then we get into a parenthetical, colloquially called heroes, and thus designated SCP-7000 Hero, and then we get another sort of like addenda parenthetical at the end, resulting in a double parenthetical. I mean, it's not like a huge deal. I mean, that works technically, but that's a good moment to observe and just notice that this is way too convoluted. It's trying to do way too much, and doesn't have a lot going for it. The subject matter, as we get down a little more into the description, becomes a little bit noospheric, almost pataphysical in nature. The setup in the description here reads like card playing instructions. Something like Magic of the Gathering cards, like the attributes that you would see on that. Like, this does attack damage to this. It is ineffective against this. That's kind of what this reads like. And so it's, once again, at no point has this article really gotten to the threshold of interesting at all. It's not interesting to basically list out what you would read on something like a Magic the Gathering card as your description. It doesn't work well. Once again, we've got these formatting issues as we get down into the addenda of the article. Once again, I can't imagine that the author doesn't know this. It just looks bad. We already talked about the image work here that I think doesn't do the article very well. The clinical tone of the article is not bad. I didn't really notice any huge errors. I mean, we did notice that one in the first sentence, so maybe there's more and I didn't read carefully. But I felt like, this was decent clinical tone, nothing huge. In the log here, basically, we get this enactment of the anomalies mechanism. It's basically similar to a Sailor Moon costume change sort of mechanism. The idea being that these garments sort of make the individual a hero. So pieces of green and yellow armor appeared around Operative Rinjani's limbs, as well as an exaggerated crown over her head. Identified as the manifestation of SCP-7000 Hero instance Jester. So it's like every costume has its own little designation that the Foundation is like. It's almost like card collecting. You kind of get that vibe from this too here. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't really know. I can't think of anything that had, costume changes that worked well. Maybe Link in Zelda, maybe something like Ocarina of Time, maybe something like Breath of the Wild. Once you get to like Final Fantasy X-2, you're kind of pushing it, really pretty hard, and then everything past that is just garbage. And I think this is firmly in that past threshold where you have garment changes that sort of define the hero. So, I mean, it comes off as just really, really, really juvenile, in my opinion, kind of stale. The author really makes room for very, very bad lines in the midst of all this. So I think the dialogue is really something that doesn't go very well for this article. Here's an example. Rinjani, how come you always get the cool stuff? I had a fucking clown last time too. That's kind of the par for lines in this article. The lines are not good. There's sort of the lines that make you scratch your head as to why they were written. And then this is another kind of typical thing about this article that we can see in footnote 2. We have this giant footnote that's basically talking about all of the different costumes that you can wear. So we have a mime hero instance, a flag bearer hero instance, and it goes into all this detail that really, it's so much, way too much detail that no one rightly cares about, certainly at this point in the article, and it isn't really relevant to the story. It's really the author getting to dress up with these fictional characters a little too much. We get into the rest of the article once we finally get through the Sailor Moon portion where they're having these garments sort of appear around them and make them powerful. We get to another anime sort of insert. The rest of this honestly reads like Dragon Ball Z, maybe a discarded episode script of Dragon Ball Z. We sit in these unexciting action sequences through more costume changes, essentially acting as pseudo escalations. There's a ton of them, Legionary, Lance, Bladesmith, 6 forging hammers hanging from her waist. I mean, this gets really ridiculous really quickly. It's just amazing. These are not good decisions that we're seeing. The dialogue, like we saw the instance earlier, just stays pretty crazed and is just plain bad. I think the author inserts sort of like Marvel casual dialogue in these apparently high adrenaline situations, sort of cheapening the impression that this is in any way tense of a read or a situation. So the result is really kind of a flop and kind of a sag. There's a line in here that I thought was pretty ironic to show up. Let me see if I can get you that. This operative says, "We're not living in some kind of superhero movie." You don't say. There isn't some big bad to defeat, and even if there is, someone else would just fill the void. So we're not living in some kind of superhero movie. I mean, kind of tone deaf. That's exactly what this article is. It feels exactly like we're just sitting in some bad superhero movie. That's really all that happens. We have these characters that are underdeveloped and uninteresting. They sort of are Mary Sue's. They're relying on sort of these action figure-like installments that the author is sort of enacting in some sort of play session that they've written down. Our villains, likewise, are this way. They eventually come out of what is essentially the background of the article to finally, get some sort of characterization. But when they do, it's once again a little flat, a little trite. Here's an example. This is one of the villains, and the villain is called Ground. "Humans, I have not seen your kind for so long, ... Your reckless bravery is almost admirable." I mean, once again, it feels like a bad dub of some DBZ, "A shame that it will do you no favor. Do you think humanity is the first to do what you've tried?" I mean, it just reads like a really bad villain. It just reads like Dragon Ball Z levels of characterization here. So, and really the article ends in the same way a Dragon Ball Z episode would end, which is basically like they kind of beat all the baddies. So, I mean, no offense, this is just a real mild article. It really does not make good decisions. I think it could stand to go through a lot of idea drafting again. And honestly, I think the rating is probably pretty fair for this one. So that's my thoughts. And like I said, we'll lean a little heavier on other people's. So let's take a look at these that I enjoyed. I think Locke is an excellent critic. Should be on the team that I'm advocating for on the site. Locke says, "There's some neat ideas for weaponry and how this hero system works that I feel would better be served by a table to showcase interesting variations." That's an excellent point. That's just a veteran author knowing how to treat an ingredient a little better. Overall, though, this is a cool anime as hell idea let down by banter between two characters that isn't really funny or entertaining enough to get into. The action also feels trite. It's kind of weak back and forth that hardly registers as escalating in danger or tension. Even when larger instances and when the big bad came into play, it hardly registers as anything noteworthy. Between the banter and repeatedly stopping to describe a cool morph ability, it's just spinning its wheels. And that's just an absolutely perfect way to put this. It's just spinning its wheels, and it doesn't really rise to the level of interest. We got Totally Not NB sort of seconding this as well. Maxi Fran is also another person who I think would be nice to have on this crit team. There's not a lot of meat here. This is what Maxi Fran says. There's not a lot of meat here. The anomaly is kind of interesting, but it feels largely overlooked in favor of the action scene with these two characters who aren't really that interesting. Most of their dialogue consists of back and forth with poor timing, one-liners, or both. There really isn't any depth to these characters. I agree. I think the author attempted sort of maybe subconsciously to make these costume changes the characters and made the characters the costumes, but it didn't work out very well. I don't think you can do very well with that setup to begin with. And then Dr. Trentavon, who's someone else who I recommend for this team. The hero instances are interesting, but the rest of the article lacks in its attempt to come across as constant action. The comedy is not particularly humorous. The combat isn't written in an outwardly invigorating manner, and the dialogue is otherwise too forced and inorganic. The ending feels abrupt, unearned, unsatisfying, and feels like it was done so to force the luck aspect of this contest, which is something that we didn't talk about, but is also, I think, I agree with. It has a ton of shortfalls that make it a pretty boring read, unfortunately. I mean, I think that's all you can really say about it. Once again, we're not trying to be mean, but, it's important to sort of call out why an article is not working so that, the author, if they're gracious and humble, they can hopefully take some of it and learn. But also it's really a signal to the rest of the site that, there's a certain standard that we're going to have, and this article doesn't quite cut it. Now, like I said, when we're not in the SCP-7000 contest and there's not as much attention that people are giving to these individual entries, articles like this are passable. I mean, articles like this are up on the site all the time. This caliber of article is very, very routinely gets the pass on SCP Wiki these days because no one's paying attention, because you can't. There's too many articles coming through to catch them all. There's too many that slip through the fingers. Like I said, in the SCP-7000 contest, that's a little different. People will, pay more attention and sort of call things out. They have a heightened sense of crit when it comes to something like this. I would encourage people to do this all the time. That's really what I was trying to do with this show. And yeah. All right, so I got some cookies in front of me, so I'm going to take the opportunity to enjoy these while we look at Harmony. Harmony sent in a video, and just to kind of once again let you know, Harmony is going to be covering from here. This is the only arc of the contest, The Ballad of Captain Adrian and Primrose Fatish von Travel by Phantom, who's a longtime author, someone who we respect in the Society for Containment Fiction for sure. And we'll go all the way up to, I think, Arrested Epiphany by Dead Cannons. So let me make sure that we can see this and hear this. And we will go. Maybe I need to download it. Yeah, I can download anyway. Tell you what, you can just look at my mug while I get this ready. I don't know why it wasn't planned, but we'll just do it this way. Here we go. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm just gonna be...
There it is. Okay. Now we'll get to it. I'm gonna eat my cookies.
Looking over all these fun entries today and seeing what there is to see. Got 9 of them up here, so I thought I'll just roll through them real fast and we'll see if there's anything interesting here. Oh wait, I should use my microphone. Alright, that sounds a lot better. We've got The Ballad of Captain...
Seems like there's a little bit of a buzz in this mic that Harmony's using, so I hear that too. Don't worry.
In Adrian and Primrose Vaughn, I Ran Out of Space, but it was written by Phantom, and I really liked it. I actually read this one before the contest, or just one of the piece that I had given a little bit of feedback to. It's got a big multimedia, multi-format presentation to it that gives a lot of verisimilitude, and I like the characters. My only real critique of it is that it was kind of hard to follow sometimes because of the lack of real descriptive language around the dialogue, making it a little bit hard to follow. There was also Athagazorophobia. It was really immersive, especially if you like to read techno-babbly type stuff. I found it a little hard to follow, kind of let it wash over me in little parts, but I did like it. The Voyager, which goes on too long, has too much cursing, I didn't really like the characters. A Hole Dug with a Rabbit's Foot is really weird, but like in an interesting way. It's got all the, it's not what you expect it to be when you first start reading. You kind of pop it up and you're like, what is this? And wash this place clean from sin. It doesn't use too many words to say a lot, which I like, because brevity is the soul of wit. Born Beneath Lucky Star, I didn't really finish reading because I found the way that it was presented to be obnoxious, that it was the same document and offset twice with different bits added to it. And I didn't want to read basically the same thing twice to get the whole story, so I didn't get the whole story because I didn't like how it was presented. Carbotus commits that cardinal sin of making it so that you are using historiosity but giving a less interesting explanation than actual history by saying that this fish in this river helped people from this area be more successful. Is like you're kind of taking their agency away and making them less interesting as characters. Do me a favor and be grateful to yourself. Kind of feels like it's going for the same character-driven vibe as The Loser, but it isn't developed as thoroughly as that article is, so it kind of falls short of the mark for me. I didn't think it had a positive message of believing and finding strength in yourself. That's always something that's good to encourage, but the overall article didn't really do much for me. And then lastly, Arrested Epiphany. While I have trouble taking bolding and the containment procedures efficiently, I did like how it put the rating module in the universe in a way that's kind of satirizing how it's become this be-all, end-all obsession and focus of so many people, and how it would actually work if it was something in universe the Foundation would want to get rid of it, not keep it. And I appreciated articles that used the old-looking format of the first wiki, even though I think it looks whack. Not as good as Sigma 9. It was still cool to see something literally from my childhood coming back in through this contest. I really like that. And you will also notice that on this here, I marked an X here, a squiggle here, and an X here, which means that it is A Hole Dug with a Rabbit's Foot, Athagorosophonia, and Arrested Epiphany that give me SCP-7000 bingo.
Nice. All right, that was Harmony. Appreciate that. A little bit of an issue with the mic, but I think it wasn't too bad. We can kind of get through that. Appreciate that. That was really nice. That last one really interested me. Obviously, I'm always been big on commentary around the rating module as sort of the SCP Wiki's patron saint and deity. So that was interesting to see. I think that's the one that Harmony was talking about. All right, so that really got us through a nice big chunk. That's what I love. I love that. All right, and then moving on, we actually have the next few, Skipcoin and Samsara. These were both done by Fern. And so let me kind of search for this real quick. All right, so Fern. What does Fern have to say? This is kind of a pretty good looking article. Really short. Look at that. Real short. Not long at all. We got some red right-handage going on. So it looks like it uses coin flips to introduce the luck theme, of course. And this is what Fern had to say about it. Do you like short and simple skips? Do you want to see a more human O5 council that aren't bumbling idiots? Then this 7000 entry is for you. It feels like I haven't read such a straightforward SCP in years. The administrator gives 051 an anomalous coin. That's pretty much it. And I like it, Fern says. It is simple. So yeah, looks like we have some nice math thrown in here. I love the way the page looks. I appreciate how this is ACS is color coded. It's well appreciated at 52. There's a decent amount of commentary going on here. Let's see what Dr. Scaramouche, who's part of our crit dream team, had to say. Wait, is this the Foundation equivalent of giving you a watch when you retire? I went back 3 times to figure out what I was missing before I just let myself ride with the simplicity. I really, really like this. Why is it Thaumiel? So that's nice. I mean, when you can do a really simple article really well, that's always an impressive thing to do. Let's see if any else of our crit dream team is on here. Yeah, here's Dr. Trentavon. There's a certain disconnect between the history section of the anomaly and the anomaly itself, so much so that they aren't really connected at all. Despite this, the charm, simplicity, and short nature of this article made it too fun and enjoyable of a read for me to feasibly downvote. Simply, I liked it. I find it hard to do anything but upvote it, despite the odd disconnect. And then once again, Radioactive Rads, one of our crit team MVPs. This was a hard one to downvote. The article premise is great. It's funny, not overbearing. My grievances, however, come in the form of clinical tone and its formatting. The clinical tone takes a more personal note, and though that does add some character, I think sticking to it would have made for an even more charming article. Rads is correct, in my opinion. That's usually how that works. As the dryness of the tone tries its best to not show emotion in the ridiculous circumstances. That's just classic SCP, classic containment fiction that has unfortunately been, that's really fallen by the wayside. The formatting could be used to show more of the actual seriousness of the council trying to figure this one out. More detail, but not overwrought addendums that go into it. All right, cool. And then Maxi Fran, who's also in the mix here. I like the idea that's presented. I don't really see the logic once again. So there's seemingly a little bit of a thematic disconnect. Maybe that has to do with the article trying too hard to fit the luck theme. But, you got to admire the article. I'm always a big fan of real aphoristic pieces that do a lot in just a little amount of space, and it sounds like this one does it. So this one is interesting. I might have to go back and read that one. The next one is Samsara, and this was another one that Fern was very kind enough to review for us. So let's take a quick eye look. Oh my goodness. So Aftocrator is one of the better CSS artists on the site. I think this is just really engaging. I think it's completely overdone, almost to the point of being ridiculous, but it does look really good. You've got to give the nod to the background work. This author is always working with really challenging setups. Is not one to go the safe route when it comes to CSS design, and so I see that again with the inclusion of this sort of Tennessee football orange here. Almost like, dump truck orange that is all throughout this. But it looks really, really well. And once again, we've had like oversized collapsibles here, sort of a luxurious sort of haptic going on with these. And it just looks really well. There's a lot of great art in here. So just visually, I think these line breaks here are just a little ridiculous. But I mean, I think it looks really good. I really like the touch of the yellow here in the classical formatting. This is a really long article I see as I'm scrolling through it. We got some table work and a bit of dialogue, but it still looks pretty thick with 3 C's. I'm really not a fan of this visually, by the way, just FYI. In an otherwise immaculate visual presentation, this 8 green, 2 red sort of Oak 5 council vote thing is, I don't know why you would want to do that. It looks like we end with a little bit of a poem, which is always nice. So let's see what, this is an interesting article for sure, and it is very well appreciated at 87. Let's see what Fern has to say about it. So, Fern says, all right, I'm still recovering from the flu, so my mind is a bit hazy, and getting into this article was difficult. But once I got it, it was worth it. Right up my alley, an article about religions. Nice play on the contest theme, kind of a subtle middle finger by having it about karma, not about luck per se. similar but not the same thing, Dr. Fern says. My only gripe is simple. The anomaly description basically lies. Once you read the whole article, you see what the real anomaly is and how quickly the stated anomaly is dropped and forgotten. So thank you, Fern, for that. Just taking Fern at his word, that's a technique that we see a lot of people do. It's a form of misdirection, but that's never a sign of a lot of talent. It's very, very easy to sort of guide someone down a certain pathway, and then it's almost the equivalent of a jump scare when it comes to leading, sort of the hand and the steps of the viewer or the reader. It's a lot better when you can do this and incorporate those two instead of there being such a strong disconnect between what the anomaly really ends up being and what you initially presented it as. That's a very difficult thing to do. Technically, we actually get more down here. Wow. It's a difficult thing to do, so hard to do. We're not interested in Ralston, no offense. Totally not. NB says, I really should have read this in one sitting. It captivated my attention, although I really liked the bit about the gods just hanging up and the idea that like scrying and communicating with gods is like a phone call. I found the bit with God funny. At first it was hard to understand the article, but as I went on it became easier to read. Take my upvote. Who else do we have on our dream team here? Dr. Balthazar is pretty good, by the way. Lieutenant Flops. Oh, that's someone that I missed. Lieutenant Flops should absolutely be on the crit team. Maybe could be a vice captain, just under Lord. But yeah, excellent. So let's just see what Flops has to say. This is a lot of crit. Good for you, Flops. This article captured me quickly with how it introduced these large, sweeping concepts that feel significant and act as an effective hook. Yeah. Sorry, it's just a little too much for us to read here, but obviously go look at Flop's comments. Excellent stuff. Rads says a downvote. Rads is hard to please. Rads, it's funny, Rads has ARDS kind of in the tail end of the name right there, rearranged. And Rads and ARDS are two of the hardest people to please, so I appreciate that about them when it comes to their crit work. Rads says, this article has nice ideas and is formatted well, but the execution and display of these concepts are what I have issues with. The way it gives the information in the tables are fine. However, when it comes to the dialogue, I found it to be too goofy and expository, especially in the 343 part. But the log before the experiment was good, as I felt some connection to the characters and it just wasn't explaining things to me. I was also disappointed to find out that the proposed requirements were expunged. I think that also is what Fern was sort of getting at. So it's a little bit of a fu to the reader. It's almost like the same thing that I would compare it to is when you were watching an episode of your episodic pseudo-canonical TV show, something like X-Files, where they really have the opportunity to basically restart everything at every new episode. There's no real spillover canonically. And, sometimes shows like that will do things like, make it to where the characters are in these terrible situations and everything is messed up and they're going to die and there's no way out. And then basically the episode ends up being basically just like someone's bad dream. And so it's kind of like, oh, the whole thing was a dream. And that's just the cheapest thing you could do as an author. It's like the laziest and the biggest middle finger you could give. It's a really, really uncouth thing to do. Dr. Scaramouche says, this is an excellently done 0K level article. I guess that's just 1,000 contest. 100 points for making it work without requiring a week to read. The technobabble went a bit long for my taste, but at the same time, none of it ended up being superfluous. All that said, I agree with someone else that this does rely on very pantheon God as exists above take on theology rather than one that allows for the divine to be inseparable from existence. I think what that statement is trying to say is contrasting a deistic God setup from something a little more theistic. I think, if I had to guess, that was a little wordy. It does raise very interesting questions of what force is responsible for karma. for the assignment of good and evil, if not a divine one. So yeah, there's some hardcore fridge horror in here, and I commend you. So yeah, this article seems relatively well received. I think it's immediately interesting just in its subject matter. It's well titled, Samsara. It seems to kind of go into that a little bit lore-wise and headcanon-wise for this particular author. So yeah, I mean, this is, I love theology, obviously, so tactical theology is pretty nice to see. I didn't read this article, so I can't comment on it, but I do appreciate everybody else who've done that for us. All right, so moving back on to, I think, the articles that I did read. So we'll get to Calamity Jack. Kennedy. This is by Dr. Phil McClaw. All right, so we immediately see this is about the Kennedys. We have this fancy ACS bar here that I don't know about that. I guess it's kind of American, so I see where you're going with that. But anyway, so this is basically a very clever and ornate history anomaly about vying crime organizations. Those including political families like the Kennedys, also including things like the Chicago Spirit. This anomaly incorporates luck fairly mildly, as bad things happening to bad people too often, but it's decorated with so much else. I think it works better than the usual flat pitch of that same idea. I thought it was a clever way to recontextualize the history of, let's say, the Kennedys' bad luck. We all know the Kennedys tend to have sort of high-profile, unfortunate ends and deaths, so I think this kind of plays on that just a little bit. There's a lot of excellent effort that's put into this article. We have audio media that we won't get into, but that is here. Superb visual fidelity to old school memos. We've got really tone-setting imagery here, with just a little bit of fantasy, almost with Lord of the Rings sort of vibes with that one. Good redaction here. Nice image. I love how this memo is sort of reproduced. It really feels very authentic. So I appreciate the work that went into this for the purposes of storytelling. And it being in universe and included that way. That's nice. We get down here, and there's basically, you can see the audio. There is a debate between Kennedy and Nixon. I think this was probably the best part of the read. It was believable. I haven't really seen something this politically charming since SCP-4444. It's sort of a silent method of warfare that's displayed here, taking place openly in a presidential debate. And it's a real treat of this article. It's really nice to exist on both levels and go back and visit something. So this is a nice job of retconning. There's the occasional formatting issue. You can see a lack of a spacing here. These are just mild things, though, that the author just missed, and I guess no one has pointed out. But I love the image work. We've got this sort of like psionic, hypnotic sort of component, a vector of attack that the author has sort of overlaid these images, so I think that's well done. Nice and tasteful. It is, as you can tell maybe from the scroll bar, it's a very, very long read. It feels a bit dragged at times, but if historical politics and power struggles are your kind of thing, you will definitely like this article. It is very well written. I think it's situationally very clever, and a good read overall. So if you do have the time for this, I would recommend it. It's a very, very clever read. So there's not a lot of discussion here. I think the article is quite underrated, honestly, if I could say. But we have really, really good commentary on this article, so we'll lean on that. Dr. Scaramouche says, it borders on going too far off the farm, but manages to hold it together. The picture of the debate is outstanding. Maxi Fran, the historical context of this piece is delicious. God, the research is really, really good, which you always got to tip your hat to, especially in this day and age where people don't do research anymore to write. This has been stated by numerous people. I think Lord Stonefish said it best, when it's more about just the immediately available, instantly digestible, superficial sort of mimetic culture. There's not a lot of people taking this art form seriously. And in some cases, you would necessarily do some research in order to convincingly convey whatever the topic is that you're trying to talk about. Well, people just simply avoid that, and they kind of pick topics that are sort of shallow more often than they used to. And so it's nice to see somebody doing old school sort of research to write an article with. The dialogue is impeccable. This was a really interesting story about JFK and the Kennedys in general. I also have to say, making your entire ending a link to another article is ballsy, and personally I think it works well here. Totally Not NB says this is a very cool piece. It blends reality and fiction, history and writing, the anomalous and ordinary in a very intriguing way. Dialogue is on point, the world building as well. So Totally Not NB has good things to say. Another member of our dream team for Crit, Radioactive Rads, says the historical background was nice to read, but as it went on, it dragged a little more. I was interested with the radio wave aspect. I was not interested with the radio wave aspect or the logs that came with it. There's an assassination plot here that didn't keep me either, as they read to be doing the same things without changing. Radioactive Reds didn't finish this. The piece feels like it can be cut without any major notices. So, yeah, just a bit of an encouragement to streamline the article, and I would agree with that. It's just probably a little too bloated. On that note, Dr. Trentavon says, man, this is a long article, so much so that I think it could have been cut down and been the same experience. That is to say, a good bit feels like bloat, might even feel necessary to some. That being said, I think the core anomaly along with the dialogues throughout are the best pieces of the article. The writing is very good and really well. So that is Calamity Jack Kennedy. Once again, very, very ballsy move, I think. It almost hooks you or loses you almost instantly with something like this, when it takes something like Kennedy and basically makes it into a luck anomaly. So that was that. The next one is Praise Be Unto Thee, O Dice Gods by Uncanyon. Let me take a peek at this one. Okay, so this one's doing well for itself at plus 40-ish. As you can see from the image here, we basically have another tabletop RPG sort of dice article. This is, I think, our third of this type of article specifically in this contest, and probably our 10th that revolves around dice, it's themselves. This article approaches the idea very categorically and very tidily, giving these different die different personalities that cause them to either favor, hinder, or uniquely help a tabletop role-playing game player's game. So this seems highly specific in its scope of demographic and potential interest. So it's not the most gripping setting, if you ask me, or if you ask, I imagine, anybody who doesn't really play tabletop RPGs. But the simplicity of this scene, I think, is engaging nonetheless. There's not a whole lot of required reading or prerequisite knowledge to kind of understand what's happening, even if you're not into this sort of thing. But the dialogue, I think, really sets this off. So if we get into, there's some table work, some pretty good table work here. We have types of these different guys. They kind of give them sort of nicknames, and traders, loyalists, specialists, old reliables, low rollers, high rollers. Kind of gives each individual die its own personality and sort of categorizes them. So once again, I think this is the more organized of these pretty common angles and directions of entries into this contest. But I think the dialogue is really what saves this piece and kind of sets it apart from a lot of the other ones. It finds ways to be funny and charming without really getting ridiculous, which once again is something that a lot of people are not really that shy about, stepping over these days, particularly in this contest. It's a really difficult balance, I think, to be funny without being ridiculous and sort of making dramatic compromises with the format and with the genre. This article does a really, really good job of that. There's nothing really too ambitious attempted here, and I think allowing a nice little space for the elements to grow naturally in, not trying to make them more than what they are. I think that was really the right decision here. It would really cheapen the article if we started with, tabletop role-playing game dice and then tried to make that some sort of existential statement. It doesn't really try to do that, so I appreciate that. It's not too long either, so ultimately I think this is a good one. We've got some good crit here, of course, so we'll kind of look at our team, our dream team. Sword Lover, I think, is good. This is cute, fun, and fascinating. Easy upvote. I'm glad you were able to get an entry done in time. Totally Not NB says, this article does what it set out to do well. The fly-a-log is well placed and funny too. Overall, this article was enjoyable. Short and sweet and a refreshing length in this concept. Maxi Fran, a really simple article that really hits all the marks when it comes to both characterization and word economy. Great phrase. The concept is pretty simple. The article lets the reader know that very well. It explores it in its entirety, and then the dialogue jumps in and helps understand why this is even an anomaly. Really liked that. So that was good to read. Dr. Scaramucci, it's really callous of me to be kind of thankful that you didn't have more time to write this, is it? This is the perfect length. The rare SCP that makes me want more, but not in the incomplete and unsatisfied way. The dialogue is natural. You really pull the characters out of a very small amount of conversation. The fact that this will get passed over for longer epics is a travesty. Your whole premise is genius, especially Theory 2, where somehow gamers create gaming gods by their pleas for help and thanks for good results. So that's a really good way to put that. Love the anomaly. This is Dr. Trentavon, another of our Crit Dream Team. Love the anomaly. I love the execution. It's short and sweet, taking the fun concept of dice having personalities and making it an actual anomaly, mixing a silly concept with a good amount of science, and furthering it by having an amazing dialogue at the end. This just hits all the right notes for me. Really good. So all that is excellent, Crit. Once again, I'm happy to leave this stream with people like that saying things like this. I don't think it'll continue after the 7-Con. I think this is sort of seasonal, unfortunately. But yeah, I certainly hope that I hope that I was an inspiration to somebody, maybe somebody on the stream team. That would be really, really cool. The next one is going to be Spontaneous Love by Rift Walker, and the A in Walker is replaced with a Q. So this is not really that long of an article as we scroll through real quick here. The design of the anomaly is pretty interesting. So it's a great way to incorporate the theme and make it new and fresh. And then really so late in this contest's sequence of entries chronologically. I mean, this is what, call it, in the last 7 articles. And it really introduces this anomaly that deals with luck that's really out there that I think was really creative and just, a really impressive thing to see so late in the game, somebody reaching down deep and getting something very creative. This is essentially a female, but the way it's described, let me just read the description here. SCP was a humanoid, it's neutralized, was a humanoid, visually female, which is kind of problematic, whatever. SCP notably had a ring of wood positioned inside its waist, severing it in half. Okay, you got me hooked. I mean, immediately, the imagery is amazing. People are going to be drawing that, right, on Twitter or whatever. Like, that's really good. SCP's survival depended upon its blood consistently quantum tunneling through the wood, despite the statistical impossibility of this happening once, much less billions of times throughout its life. So, I mean, just an incredible package of the theme, sort of interestingly sort of diffused into it, and this really striking visual component. So I thought this anomaly design was really, really good. Just fresh out of the gate. Like I said, something very refreshing to see so late in the contest. But I think the setup of the article is somewhat ruined by the 3rd paragraph right here. So we get a really great intro. We get a little bit of sort of situational characteristic development in the 2nd paragraph of the description. And then we get to the 3rd. And what happens in the 3rd is this. SCP's presence increases the chance of statistically improbable or even impossible events. We already have, a really imaginative instance of the luck theme that we've already seen sort of buried deeply into the actual anomaly design in paragraph 1. And attaching this very expected, very trite, very overplayed component to the anomaly when it comes to luck in the 3rd paragraph here, it feels just really incongruous and unmatched with the rest of the article so far. So it's it juts out like bad machining. It's a real bad error in my opinion. We didn't really need this. We didn't need to introduce this very trite, overplayed, statistically improbable sort of buttress thing in the design. I think it would have been a lot better if we could have just erased that. I also feel like the article gets a little bit too lazy with respect to the discovery section, where the anomaly basically just pops up fully manifested in the office of a Foundation doctor. But as you read the article, you really understand this whole thing is a meditation on the Boltzmann brain. And so that, if you know what that is, that really helps to sort of set this otherwise really convenient plot inclusion into something a little more substantial there. We get a log as part of the discovery here, and I think the writing here is pretty average. We've got some places that probably could use some formatting work. We need that to help the pacing. I think it really affects it in a poor way and really causes this to sort of lag just a little bit. And then also, in addition to that, I think even worse than that, we get a lot of repeated information that we've already gotten. So that's not fun. And then we get a little down here and we start to get these slight inclusions in brackets. And I understand that the author is trying to, in universe, have somebody transcribe something from a physical analog piece of paper that's damaged. But I'm not too really sure how good of a thing that is. I mean, it basically it kind of just slows the read down without really adding any tension. These unreadables are essentially redactions, and it doesn't really seem like they're really that meaningful, I think. So that's not great. And then really going back to here, so due to this souring inclusion from this third paragraph of the description, unfortunately, the article takes that and goes in that direction. So it's really like the worst possible decision or direction that you could go in with the article. You really take a lot of it and you walk into the worst direction that you've offered yourself here. And it really kind of equates luck with plot convenience. A good example is the containment breach that we see happen a little later in this article here. There's some nice moments. I particularly like the one where the rain never hits the entity. So this entity kind of gets outside, and luck would have it that no raindrop in the downpour actually hits. It's always in the negative space between the raindrops. However that happens, I don't know, but I like that a lot. That was really cool. The article does have cool moments like that in here, but the relationship is really the center of this, the relationship between the SCP and this researcher Low that develops between these two. If you'll recall, the entity was essentially a female. So there's a relationship that happens here. But I think it's a little too forced. It comes a little too quickly. It isn't really, I think, built in the way. It feels a little hollow. It feels a little unengaging. And that, once again, that's really at the center of this article. So I think that doesn't do it very, very good favors. There's also really kind of silly things that are thrown in here that I can't really place very well. So, for example, the subject was asked to provide a random number below 100 and replied with 69. It seems as though the author's doing this kind of stuff just for its own hilarious sake, sort of like Easter eggs that smell kind of like rotten eggs. But ultimately, this has a refreshing quality to it and does some interesting things, particularly late in the contest, once again, in sort of these small miniature vignettes that keep the article engaging throughout, I think enough to get through it pretty well. I think it had the potential to be really, really bad, but kept itself at sort of a meh kind of level through some well-timed and well-paced scenes. Once again, my favorite being the rain scene, but there's a lot of really cool little scenes like that really kind of make this a delight to kind of get through. And I think ultimately this is a pretty cool title, Spontaneous Love. We don't really need to get into the comments here too much. But once again, the author is telling us that the Boltzmann brain is a thought experiment that suggests it might be more likely for a single brain to spontaneously form in a void, complete with a memory of having existed, rather than for the entire universe to come about in the manner cosmologists actually think it did. So that's kind of a cool little thought experiment that's famous. Dr. Scaramucci says, as written, I should downvote because the presentation isn't fully up to snuff. It seems rushed and really could do with some time to edit for style and pacing, but I can't because the premise is just so intriguing and the vignettes are so endearing. So there's some comedy in here too that's done really well. Once again, the author really appreciated Dr. Scaramucci's comment because Dr. Scaramucci is one of our dream team critters. Really good stuff. Totally Not NB says, seconded about a -1 rating because some of the humor was on point, but the article has a lot of potential. Would be more enjoyable with a look overall okay article. Yeah. So, I agree. Like I said, this had the potential to be really bad. It made some very precarious decisions right here. And then, of course, this unfortunately sort of infused its way into the rest of the article. But just the rest of the article that was around these bad decisions, I think, was enough of a supporting cast to pick the article up from being bad to where it is now, in my opinion, which is kind of just meh. The next one is Pseudopigraphia. This is by Karath. Interesting. I think this is one that Fern did. Let me check. Nope. Is this one that I was supposed to look at? Oh, the reason why I didn't do it is because it's -7. We got to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a break whenever we get across things like this. So, but once again, I don't know how much I'm going to do this anymore, but I don't really let the ratings speak for the article to me. I'll typically read these anyway, and if I think they're good enough to be platformed, I'll generally offer them publication. The next one is What Comes to Pass. This is by Weez Hong. I know I said that incorrectly, but whatever I messed up in there, I hope it's made up for in the recognition that this is a really, really good author. He's been around for a long time and is consistently very, very good. It doesn't have a lot of the bombast, doesn't have a lot of the commerciality that a lot of other authors that I think try to have that get. But this is just a writer's writer, I think, and has done excellent work in the past and continues to do it here, honestly, in this article, which is what comes to pass. Very underrated. Very, very underrated for its quality. I kind of want to take a little bit of a detour here. I think this same author wrote this, which is from the 4000 contest, and if I'm not mistaken, was the absolute last article to be submitted to this SCP-4000 contest and ended up doing really, really well for itself as my computer tries to freeze. I know Modern Erasmus was in on this, and I think it was also this other author. We'll come back to that as the computer decides what it wants to do. But then we'll hang out here. This is, oops, 1 second, maybe now if we do it. Sometimes it just goes right away. Oh, no, it was written by May D. Sorry, my bad. Uh-oh. Who's this commenting here? Who's this? Don't know. My bad. I thought this was Weishong who wrote this one, but it must have been a different one. I think the reason I thought that is because some of these divs look very similar to one another as we get down in here. A lot of colorful divs. Not really my favorite thing to see, but I think it does okay. Obviously, we got a little bit of flare at the bottom here where we get this ombre sort of, cascading into a dark blue, and that really obviously is a reflection of the emotional arc of what's happening in this piece at that point. So that's nicely well tied together, I guess, if you don't mind this sort of garish visual stuff. I would prefer it if the article didn't rely on the visual gimmicks to sort of buttress what's happening with the emotions here, but that's just me, and I totally get it. It's not really that big of a deal. It does look good. So anyway, what is this article about? Well, this is an interesting article, I think, that is really an Apollonian class, so it's nothing that can be contained. It's the designation given to a series of related ontological phenomena that result in the disappearance of affected entities from local real space. As per the current revision of this documentation, SCP-7000 is believed to have affected between 50 and 70% of the human population. So basically 50 to 7% of the entire population on the Earth has been sort of instantly sort of disappeared somehow ontologically. So it's an interesting thing, a nice design. This is technically a one-sentence description, introduction, and I think it does, actually it's two, sorry. But it does a really, really good job. It's a very powerful way to enter the description and to bring across the anomaly. It's a great hook. Definitely makes me want to read the rest of it. Before we get into that, we started the article off with sort of this out-of-universe device that I think, does a better job of justifying itself. We see this all the time. So many articles these days, particularly in this contest, where basically you have this sort of way to introduce the article, and it's basically people sort of exiting the in-universe requirements for the genre and the format in order to, enact that effect. This one, I think, actually does a pretty good job of justifying itself. It's people who've sort of come back to this document after this sort of rapture-like situation has happened and are commenting in the actual document. So I think it actually works pretty well. As for the article itself, it's expertly worded, it's expertly written. I wouldn't expect anything less from this author, and certainly came through with that. Like I said, it's an interesting anomaly that's very mysterious as it is dramatic. It's kind of global in scale, which I think adds to the intrigue of it. And like I said, sort of has this reverse rapture feel to it. We get to a certain line in the article, and I love moments like this in articles where it's really the heart of the article that the writer allows to be worn on the sleeve. And so here it is right here. You always hear about people dying from some rare freak cancer way too early, or some accidental car crash where the drunk driver's there late at night. Sometimes a celebrity OD'd too young, or yada yada yada. Not for that long though. You had other things to think about. Those were just news stories, is all. Until they weren't. Until the news stories became your stories. That's really the heart of this article. And I really, really like that. It's really where everything develops from, and has the luck theme sort of incorporated into it in a playful way. I think it's a little more explicit than something like we saw with the Grand Symphony of 1976, which had a very similar take, but one that was really relegated to the author commentary and really, really buried under the article, I think, for it to really come across meaningfully. This one is positioned a little more upfront and is a little more integrated into the actual documentation and, certainly the commentary that we get from these individuals speaking here. So I think this does a very, very good job of that. I love the detail of this where the author confounds SCP-7000. So this one line here, about a third of the way into the article. Even usage of SCP-2000 produced no success. Attempts to recover an affected individual from SCP-7000 resulted in a never-before-seen machine error. So I just love that, because obviously SCP-2000 has been abused as plot convenience a lot. And, something that a lot of people overlook in that article is that, the author of SCP-2000 included sort of a failsafe inside of it, sort of a systems check to make sure, hopefully, that this Deus Ex Machina isn't abused in sort of a plot convenience type of fashion where, there's a line in SCP-2000 that says, we can only basically play God so many times before it doesn't work anymore. And a lot of the people that I talk with in the Society for Containment Fiction Discord and people like Harmony and Almer Duck and whoever else are correct in saying that a lot of people completely overlook that, and they basically just take those juicy moments of SCP-2000 and run with it. So it's really, really nice to see the author have some cognizance of that part of SCP-2000 and sort of play towards it. So basically they can't use it in this article, which is just nice. I appreciate that. I appreciate when the author confounds something that a lot of people can only appreciate as plot convenience. So it's a nice little touch, I think. We get escalation in the third addendum. I think that's the third addendum. Yeah, it is. We get a nice escalation here in the third addendum that makes this more eerie and compelling. Shout out to Statues, which was the theme of IndieCon 2022. A couple of months ago. This would have been a great entry in that, I'll tell you that much. Might have won $250. I don't know. But anyway, always happy to see Statues. Shout out. And then there's some fun commentary on the societal role of conspiracy thinking Don't tell me you were a conspiracy guy before all of this. Well, I was right, wasn't I? Okay, fair enough. So I've made some comments in the past that I'm sure people laughed at that sort of casts conspiracy-like thinking as sort of advantageous when it comes to thinking about containment fiction and writing in containment fiction and trying to force alternative relationships between things that are existent out in the world and that people usually just brush over very naturally. And so it's nice to see this here too. I think that this is kind of like, this is a nice way to say what I've been trying to say, just doing it in an actual piece, in actual writing. So I thought that was a nice moment. So anyway, all in all, this is just a really, really well-written, very engaging article that puts you immediately into some sympathetic world building and characterization. I appreciate the tones of the characters sort of juxtaposing that of the document very well and maintaining their individual voices. You know, honestly, in a different world, I think this could have been a pretty good SCP-001. Not huge, but solid. Excellent delivery of the emotional hit points, particularly at the end here, almost as if that moment was carved very elegantly from the structure of the article itself. Very fine detail work here, very good pacing, firm character delivery. Like I said, we're treated to some visual elements that get a little purple, literally as well. We get, I wonder if the author did that intentionally, but we do literally get purple by the end of the article, like in the div. So for what that's worth. So it's a little overdone, in my opinion, but the prose also gets a little purple too, just to kind of match that. So it gets a little too much for my tastes, but it's totally justified in universe, which is really all I can hope to ask for. So I appreciate that. But this is a nice little moment to end this catastrophe article, really on the private memories of one of the last remaining survivors of the human race, given this SCP-7000 anomaly. This author has total command over the theme, over the world, infusing it into all of its details, creating an incredibly cohesive thematic textile. I'll give you a good example of that. There's a part where the O5 Council does a vote, right, like we typically do. This one has an 11-2 vote, and then we get down a little bit with a 2-1 vote of the O5 Council. The resolution is passed. Just small little details like that have the situation and the theme and the idea of the article just so densely contracted and packed into the world building here. We just get the O5 Council now has 3 members, just casually like that. I mean, it's brilliant. I love the detail of this. It's really in the details that we get a lot of this fine artistry. I love the author's quote as this being a quiet apocalypse. Awesome. Great pairing of words. Excellent way to put this. And then, of course, we get good crit from our dream team. Sword Lover comes by, says, God, this was excellent. What a beautiful exploration of humanity in the face of encroaching oblivion. Awesome. My only complaint is that this was kind of obvious that one of the 2 speakers would disappear. Sorry, spoilers. But not really enough to dampen my enjoyment. Fantastic work. Who else says something really good? I think Kirby actually came by. The typical Wise Hong banger. One of my favorite parts of every KCON is seeing what bullshit you pull out at the buzzer. Yeah, which once again, I thought happened in SCP-4000, but maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, so this is kind of what this author is known for doing, sort of clutch at the buzzer, kind of 3-point shots. This is no exception. Totally not NB said, love this so much. Very interesting take on the theme and a bizarre anomaly. The characterization was good. I really liked the disappearance. The takeaway was also very good. Really cool article. Maxi Fran reads into this very emotionally, says, if you were to disappear today, would you be okay with it? Would you say you've lived a worthwhile life? This article hits that level of existential calm that is really hard for articles to hit. There's this feeling of resignation that honestly hits pretty close to home with current events. It's a serene piece of something that happens, and here it can't be averted. It's as if the piece itself says it's not necessarily about the apocalypse, but rather about coming to terms with it. And I think that got translated into the writing really, really well. So I think that was a really, really good way to say that. And then Dr. Trentavon called out the 2-to-1 vote of the O5 Council. Just incredible line that I want to highlight here before the crit. I totally agree. It really says a lot with so little. I honestly like this article a good bit. The characters aren't full of a ton of depth, but their interactions read genuinely enough to be invested. And the anomaly, while never truly explained, intrigued me quite a lot. I think that's a really, really great point. Something that sort of acts in the background of this article, sort of as a hovering sort of background radiation of mystery and intrigue. It's relatively short, well written. We never know when it'll be cut court. The ending monologue really hammers this idea home beautifully. It's really quite beautiful. So, Uncle Nicolini, like the existential dread. Yeah. So, I guess we'll stop there for that article. But this is a really, really good one. Probably the best one that I read this week is this one. What Comes to Pass by Wise Hong. All right, the next one is the long winding road. Sorry, I was about to say the long and winding road, which, as we all know, is a Beatles song. The long and winding road. Okay, and then so Fern was kind enough to look at this one for us. So let's take a little peek here. Oof. Yeah, so this is a really long article. It's really hard to see the scroll bar because everything is blacked out, but this is what we're working with here. There's a lot of text here. There's a lot. And it does really, one of the cardinal sins, basically there's a floating transcript. I mean, at least it coats it in sort of an in-universe thing in the article here. But it is sort of this, discombobulated sort of floating addendum that shows up at the beginning of the article instead of the rest of it. But let's see what Dr. Fern has to say. Dr. Fern says, "Wow, buddy, that was an adventure. A tale disguised as an SCP and done well. One nitpick, and it's very minor. I personally don't quite understand how a Serpent's Hand member can be a bigot. Like, out of everyone, you'd expect them to be the most understanding. Other than that, this was an amazingly fun read with enough SCP fan service to be real entertaining with a fun amount of GOI use. Our anomaly is a non-binary individual in their late 20s, African. The anomalous property to manifest objects that prove useful in their current situation, which, might be good, but once again, that is, to me, almost instantly automatically equivocating luck with plot convenience. It's going to be really hard, in my opinion, for this article to actually get off the ground with that sort of design. And it's just a tremendously long read. It's got a lot of comments, more comments than upvotes for whatever that means. Uncle Nicolini, to be honest, I had my foot out the door the moment I saw you had a character named Dr. Ravioli, but I fully checked out once Herman Fuller showed up. Admittedly, that isn't very far into the article, but I just couldn't keep myself going after that. Cole13, who I guess is someone who wrote this as well, said, "Ravioli is just a name. In my opinion, there are far more ridiculous names in the site." Yeah, well, that's not a... See, this is why you can actually do things that hurt the wiki, that make it much worse. Is because when you have really dumb names, for people on the wiki, and you just pass it off because you and your friends thought it was chuckle-worthy, and it's actually kind of shitty, like writing, other people are going to try to copy you. So now we have a guy on the site whose last name is Ravioli. That's really, to the author's point, that's really pretty mild when it comes to the insanity of characterization names that we see on the wiki these days. It gets a lot more ridiculous than that. But, I definitely agree with Uncle Nicolini here. It's really hard to take articles like this seriously. Let's see. Here's Totally Not NB, one of our Dream Team critters. I agree with the previously stated critique. The article was engaging, but there was a variety of major plot holes that took me out of the story. We don't have to get into the details here. The tone was also inconsistent. Yada, yada, yada. Okay. But yeah, a lot of talk here. Radioactive Rads was not impressed. The article doesn't take time to properly build up its events. Okay. Maxi Fran, Dr. Trentavon. Once again, these people are, you should go read their comments. They're really good at what they do, and they're pretty consistent as well. Okay, so this is probably the second best article that I read this week. It's really, really neck and neck, honestly, with Wise Hong's. And this is Noblesse Obligée. I know I said that incorrectly, by Jack V.S., who's somebody I'm pretty impressed with these days. This is really an article that's an interesting take on monarchy and sort of like the luck of being born into a monarchy and into a sort of royal family. I think I was initially a little concerned because if we see this image and we see the caption, it says, "Statue of Charlemagne, First Holy Roman Emperor and Suspected SCP-7000 Instance." So as early as the caption, we have what seems to be a history rewrite article, and it's kind of like what Harmony said in her review video tonight, which is that, unless you can really make it very interesting, you're essentially cheapening what happened historically when you try to sort of, rewrite or retcon sort of history. So I was a little worried about that. But as we get into it, this is a really, really interesting anomaly. It's playing, like I said, with sort of divine rights of authority and monarchical rule. It's really, really well written. It does get a little bit long-winded. For example, in the containment procedures, we hang around a little longer than I think we need to. It does have some moments of turbulence flow-wise in the description. For example, there's a part in here about an information generator that I think was a little too much. We get basically a sort of what is this thing called? I can't remember. I should know because I have a biology major, for crying out loud. What is this? The thing where you basically look up people's heredity, heredity square thing. A Punnett square? No, it's not a Punnett square. That's a percentage thing. Y'all help me out. What the hell is this thing called? It's going to bother me. Anyways, you get one of these things where you have squares. I guess this is a little outdated, squares and circles, men and women. Very binary. Very binary. No bueno. Anyways, back to the actual article. So it's really, really well written. Does have some moments where it could use a little bit of help, but it's very, very slight. This is a really well-polished article. I think the ethics of this article are really well positioned. It sort of puts the Foundation in the somewhat awkward role of promoting autocrats in order to keep this anomaly kind of contained. So the portion, for example, with the ethics committee right here in the first addendum is really detailed, very careful, and really delightfully arrives at the ethical conclusion that these autocrats must remain in power. And then we get down to a credential lock. This is obviously already filled out for us. We get some interesting sort of graph work here. The caption reads, "Estimated Foundation containment integrity since 1965." This is looking like a bad stock, quarter, where the line is going down pretty reliably. So behind the lock here, we get a really fascinating and almost beckoned inward application of this anomaly to the Foundation itself. The document goes on to explain that the Foundation kind of is its own quasi-world government and therefore is subject to this SCP-7000 that deals with sort of monarchical, authority over, nation states. I can only describe the rest of the document that follows down here, particularly in this last div, as mind-blowing. I really, really thought this was excellent. The gymnastics and acrobatics with which this author weaves the themes of human sociobiology, politics, power struggle, ethics, the dynamics between all these things, and the theme of luck really, really is remarkable. This article is right up my alley, very philosophical, certainly something I would have liked to have written myself. And then really satisfyingly, this article does something. So that's been a phrase that we've said a lot during this season that is coming to a close tonight, by the way. But this season of Weekend Collapsibles, something that we've talked about when we covered the 7000 contest is, does the article do something? It's one of the reasons why something like the SCP-7000 contest or any contest should be determined not only by article quality, but that extra component of fitting the theme really well, and also, fitting into the winning spot very well. I think those are actually very important things to consider, contrary to the official word these days. The article here does something. It tackles the old idea that the Foundation must be sort of subservient to humanity at large. We get to a point, whether by desperation or by escalation of people's ambitions, where in this article, to protect something is to sort of domineer over it in an authoritarian-like fashion. And so the article really finds this very clever way to sort of blend those two moments into the same exact thing, protecting something and sort of like being an authoritarian ruler over that thing. And so it's a really, really complex thing to get to. It's really skillfully and gracefully done. The author is a really, really talented individual when it comes to weaving concepts like that together, to the point that you get to that moment where they're the same thing, at least in the people, in the eyes of the people who are making these decisions. Not everybody can do that with their writing. That's a really hard thing to do. But one of the most delightful things about this article is just how faithfully the author runs through the argumentation that gets you to that confluence, that vector, that point, moment of this ethical situation here. So, you read this and you kind of, for example, you kind of have to say like the O5 Council, it's like, well, they're not wrong, so, it's a really interesting place to be that this article takes us to. So I appreciate that the article does do something. It really tackles sort of foundational ethical questions about the Foundation, and what it's doing in the world, if it serves the world. Let me just read this last few sentences here, just because I think they're so good. Dissenters within the committee, they're talking about the ethics committee, this is the O5 Council writing. Dissenters within the ethics committee will likely cite the popular adage, and it quotes, "The Foundation does not rule the world, the Foundation serves the world." This is actually a link to the ethics committee orientation tale. In the considered opinion of the council, this represents a short-sighted adherence to an outdated doctrine. This is not the choice presented to the Foundation. It is to rule the world or cease to exist. SCP-7000 states beyond doubt that rule is the natural state of humankind, and to deny this law is to invite catastrophe and inevitable decay. To refuse this fact on the basis of an idealistic attachment to subservience would be antithetical to our mission. The Foundation will rule the world because we must. I don't think there are better lines in this contest. Those are some banger lines. And to end on it, especially that last one, that is good. Really, really good. I mean, talk about going out with a punch. That's not easy to do. Talk about one-liners, right? Talk about stingers at the end, right? This is how you do it. This is really, really good. So I do appreciate, I hope it's clear, you can see that this article is trying to achieve something that I think does very well while it's at it. And just something really impressive about this is that, by being like hyper logical and by coming from very interesting and creative angles into an argument like this, it really makes something like the O5 Council way more terrifying, than they typically are presented as, right? The O5 Council in this context are at their most terrifying. And they're not even anomalous. They're just kind of like thinking things through. It's really a matter of self-preservation, like we read. So the implications here are just they're arching into great distances in very, very dark places, and it's just an exceptional read. It's just well crafted. It's short. It's punchy. It's effective. So I think the luck theme is its only weakness, is trying to integrate that into it. Like, for example, there are a few places that you can kind of want to try to put it into, but when you try to do that, it's almost immediately flabbergasted. So, like, for example, we could try to think about luck as being sort of, why things like the natural state of humanity is to be subservient in the first place. But that also kind of flabbergasts the whole thing because, if it's the natural state of humanity to be subservient, then there really isn't a lot of luck included in why we get to things like historical monarchies and things like that. And so there doesn't seem to be a lot of luck. I think the only place that it kind of finds refuge in is the idea that some people are they find themselves luckily in the position of being at the height of those hierarchies. Just like being, hey, sorry, you were born into this family over here while this person was born into, basically being a demigod. So sorry, just kind of luck. I think that's really where the only place that luck can fit into this very well. So it's kind of a secondary thought, It's kind of tangential, but I think it really kind of hits enough to where that's interesting. What else can we see? This is one of the last things posted at midnight. Sword Lover says, I don't care if you posted this at 12:01. It's fucking awesome. Amazingly creative concept. The note at the end, TM, is very effective in conveying the true impact of the anomaly and the links the Foundation will have to go in order to contain it. Let's see. What else can we say? Radioactive Rads was impressed. I enjoy historical or history type articles. This one made Manifest Destiny into a readable anomaly concept and turned it up by 10. Its ideas were smooth to read, and if I do have one critique to make, it was the ethics committee part that could have been a bit more engaging as it began to drag on for a little bit. Other than that, it was great. The last line was immaculate. Very well said, Rads. Excellent. Maxi Fram, we actually got the whole crew showing up here. It's one reason why I would put all of these individuals in the dream team for Crit for the site. Maxi Fran really liked this one. There's an amazingly interesting concept, and you elevated it to its most logical extreme. The philosophy and morality behind the concept was really good. And then we have this step with the Foundation and the logic behind the admin and why they take over. It's just such a satisfying read. Amazing concept, executed brilliantly. Easy one. Totally Not NB says, this rocks. I was apprehensive at first about the concept because it was a bit confusing. It set itself up to be just a regular article. The ending changed all that, and it just fucking slaps. One of the coolest entries, in my opinion. +1, of course, ending was on point. And then Dr. Scaramucci says, this is ludicrous, yet somehow you pull it off. I have no notes. Pacing is good, language is spot on, and your final note conveys gravitas without going purple. Excellent article. Yeah. So, I mean, once again, with people making comments like this, I don't really have a purpose up here anymore. That's not really why I'm not doing this anymore. But, yeah, I mean, I wish people were this good at crit at all times on the wiki. I think it'd be a much more, healthier place. I think it'd be a much better place to write and read. All right, so that was that. Certainly, probably my second favorite of the read of this week for mine. It's, like I said, neck and neck with What Comes to Pass by Weishong. Okay, the next ones, once again, were covered by Fern. So I want to thank Fern for sending in crits of these. So this one is 13 Indeed by Fishish, and I think someone else did this too. There are no containment procedures. We can see somebody kind of goofily squinting. It's very short, really in the style of this author, and I think I see. So that's really why this is here. But yeah, so while we're at it, Fishish is certainly a Neo-Lil Foundation author, right up there with Plague PJP. Jack Waltz, I think, was the co-writer with this. These two kind of work together a lot. I'm not a fan. I'm a fan of Jack Waltz when he's writing by himself. I certainly think that he is dragged down when writing with, well, let's just stop it there. But anyway, as we can see, this is a very popular style of article these days. Let's see what Dr. Fern has to say about it. So this one is literally a joke. A funny joke, don't get me wrong here, but a joke nonetheless. Clever use of the unlucky number 13's superstition, and a nice twist on Captain Kirby's 001 proposal about 0513. In all this, all in all, this article is very short and simple, definitely not for everyone. It got me a chuckle at least. So I'm certainly not going to spend any time in this article. I think we all know what this is about and what it's interested in doing, so I'm not really interested in the article at all. The last one is Lost and Unfound by Real Surreal Sir, and Unfound. I think Fern did this one too. Let me try to find it. Dang. Wow. I got to the very end, and it looks as though... Dang, I don't think I actually have any notes on this. So we'll really have to rely on other people. We've got an interesting image here. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of the Grand Symphony of 1976 and also a little bit of SCP-4000 mixed in there. Decently rated at +19. A lot of image work here. I kind of gave this one a brief read-through. It kind of felt like it was trying to do Slender Man just a little too much. It's quite long. We've got a lot of tab and collapsible work going on here. So let's just really lean on who is going to be doing crit from now on, I guess, in whatever spotlight remains for the subject. Totally Not NB says, I also wanted to add at points this is effective horror, but it's not held and the story drags in the beginning and the end. Let's see if anybody else from our dream team can help me out here. Radioactive Rads and MaxiFran are showing up here. I feel the article loses its imagery, tone, and atmosphere shortly after you leave the description. You present us to this mysterious place with weird creatures with weirder rules and start us off with a long detail about this project. The whole segment drags, and I feel like it can be shortened. Stopped reading. The issues above eroded a lot of the interest. This one's, MaxiFran says, this one's interesting, but there's definitely a lot of fat that could be trimmed. I think the main aggressors, yada, yada, yada. On the good points, though, the piece is really good. I love the way it's explored. The entities are interesting. The overall vibe it gives, as well as the ending, pretty cool. So MaxiFran ended up liking that one. And then, once again, Dr. Scaramucci. I agree with Rads above, so I won't rehash their critiques. I did push to the end of the article, despite also wanting to stop at multiple points. The good are the pictures. Those are some A-plus level SCP images. Critique, I didn't get that article. The Conprox and descriptions give us an article that the rest of the text doesn't describe. The language is way over the top. I found myself wondering if perhaps the author thought that clinical tone required the overuse of 10-cent words. Clinical means clinical, succinct, direct. It shouldn't sound like a thesaurus went rogue. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, so sorry, I thought that I had gotten one from Fern, but I think I must have been mistaken by that one. Oh, no, here it is. I found it. So let me read Dr. Fern's. Dr. Fern says, oh my goodness, this was good. A truly unique twist on the luck theme with the focus on missing persons. Good tie-in with folklore and a satisfying open ending. Loved the inclusion of different departments. Gave this article a very deep feel. Like it reaches deep into the foundation. This is a well-written article tackling a challenging topic. I fully recommend it be read by everyone. So that's a nice bunch of praise from Fern. So check it out. Once again, I was very impressed with the image work. This is incredibly creepy. I wish it was a little bigger and a little sooner, honestly. But yeah, really good. So that's Lost and Unfound by Real Surreal Sir. And that really wraps it up. We have now covered every single SCP-7000 article on this stream show. We've gotten through every single one, except for the loser. And if you would like to tune in, Harmony and I will be doing that on Sunday night. We will start probably around, let's say 10 o'clock Central Standard Time, probably 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We may actually push that back an hour, start at 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern, so that we have plenty of time. What we're going to do is talk about, obviously the winner of this article, which is The Loser by Harry Blank. Once again, we haven't really given our detailed opinions and thoughts about this article. I think there's a lot to be said. I have a ton of commentary on this article that I think is good and bad. So I certainly think that it's definitely worth going through very, very carefully. So we'll do that on Sunday evening. That'll be the last time that I stream. So if you've enjoyed this and you like that, I recommend you check that out. and join us for that. We'll go through the midnight. We'll end it shortly after the contest is called, and just give our overall thoughts on the contest and probably share our personal top 10s of the contest. Right now, the loser from me is at number 2. Number 2 or number 3. So hopefully that gets you interested a little bit, piques your interest. All right, so that's it. I can't believe we got through all this. Once again, I want to thank people for watching this. This was never going to last forever. It ended up lasting a little shorter of a time than I thought it really would, but that's life. I've got to move on. So I really am proud of what we did. Once again, I hope it was something that people could enjoy and learn from. And I think my greatest hope is that people take from this how to read an article more carefully, because it's not always the case that crit isn't like this magic thing that determines how good articles are going to be in the site. I mean, to be honest with you, some people on the wiki can write things and not get any crit, and it's just as good as if they had crit. Sometimes crit makes articles worse. But it's important to have a very strong muscle of crit that you can apply. Not just in times of 7,000 contests or whatever contests. Because if you don't really, it's about resistance. It's about keeping things from happening. It's less about making certain things happen. It's more about keeping things from happening. And for example, the standards of the wiki devolving such that something like, these articles that basically are just one-liner jokes thriving on the wiki. That's really a clinical symptomatic sort of thing that shouldn't be there for a writing site that wants to, take itself seriously, I guess. But anyway, that's a bigger conversation than what we can have here right now. Anyways, so we've done this pretty quickly tonight. I was kind of hoping that would be the case because once again, we're doing a second stream on Sunday. Kind of want to save myself. But once again, I really appreciate everybody joining. I've had a blast up here. I'm really going to miss covering all the SCPs as they come out and staying up to date with the SCP Wiki. I've been doing this for about 4 months, and it's been a huge challenge and very, very rewarding personally for me to get up here and do this. So I hope that people can continue to crit very diligently and diligently and, very satisfyingly. Those crit people that I said, I'll say them again because I think these people should form a team on the SCP Wiki because the staff sure isn't going to do it. But Lord, Lieutenant Flops, Sword Lover 87, Dr. Trentavon, Radioactive Rads, Dr. Scaramucci. I think Modulum should show up. SD Lock is good. Ard, A Random Day is pretty good too. Totally Not NB. And then Maxi Fan. We'll throw Maxi Fan in there too. These people can as a group, weightlift the whole wiki when it comes to crit. So I appreciate all the things that they've done. I've really enjoyed reading their crit from these articles these past however many weeks we've been doing this, 4 weeks. So, I'm still going to be watching. You won't see much of me anymore, but I'll still be kind of watching and around, obviously reading. So I look forward to what's going to happen in the future. And, whatever differences I have with people stylistically, things like, whatever, Neo-Law Foundation, whatever, I don't agree with the style, but I think it's important to have a variety of styles available on the wiki. So, it all comes down to that. I wouldn't push cancel on Neo-Law Foundation if I had the power to do it. I would just let it do its thing. But anyways, so, I think crit should always be something that makes the SCP Wiki stand out. Just to wax poetic for a second before I go, DJ Cactus interviewed Dr. Gears in 2016 as part of the Cactus Cast, and one of the things they talked about, Dr. Gears was reminiscing on the first days of the wiki and what it was going to be like when they started it. Dr. Gears, an explicit quote from him is to say that they had to kind of be assholes because what they were trying to do is prevent their site from becoming like every other, collaborative fiction, creepypasta, derivative project that had happened up until that point, whether it was the holders or something else. And the one thing that differentiated them was not the popularity. It wasn't, how many people there are around it. upvote, stuff, positive comments and stuff like that. Those are all great. But what differentiated it, what got the SCP Wiki and more off to the start that it did and made it separate itself from other forms of what was trying to happen in similar veins around that time and beyond was its ability to hold itself to a higher standard of crit and compositional standards. And I think that that's probably been weakened quite a lot at the SCP Wiki. I think the tastes of the SCP Wiki are lower, in quality than they ever have been. When you have someone like Kalinin come back and Kalinin can, rip an article apart without saying a single thing about the author, and that is still taken to be a Rule 0 violation, I think that you're probably in trouble. I think that's kind of a litmus test, that you need to kind of think about. So there's a good way to do it. There's a bad way to do it, but you should always be doing it and doing it well. There's always a competition between someone who's writing and someone who's critting. Whoever does it better wins. And so you got some good people out there doing crits, so you got to write a better article than they can crit your article in. So that's the challenge, and that should make you a better writer. So anyways, all that to say, I really appreciate it. I really like this space. I really like the people in it. I'm going to miss doing this. I'm going to miss actually keeping up with everything too. It's been a lot of fun. But you never know what's going to happen. I think I'll write till the day I die. So you may hear from me again. I don't know. This has been SCP-CRNP, aka Like a Lepers, and thank you so much for joining. Hopefully, I'll see you in another life. Bye-bye.